class, welcome to EdVantage. My name is Huntsinger and I am your professor for sociology. And today we're going to be talking about social structure and social interaction. What is social structure? Well, you could think of social structure kind of like the human body. It's the bones that support society. It is the pattern relationships that form over time. It's behaviors and attitudes that determined our location or our social location, as we talked about in a previous video, as well as our institutions, our social institutions. Within social structure, we also occupy different statuses that we'll talk more about, achieved statuses and ascribed statuses in a couple minutes. And we also play roles that are associated with our statuses. On the macro level, which means broad scale, we're focused on social institutions, which are patterns of social behavior that come together to form a common purpose. Emil Durkheim, we've talked about before, said that society is sui generis, which is a Latin term that means that society takes on a life force of its own beyond the individuals that make up society. So for example, if you take a football team, if you are a football fan and you are watching a high school football game and you decide to go back to that same high school 10 years later, you might see that the players are different, perhaps even the coach is different, but the essentials of the game is the same. And that's the same with social structure and social institutions. The players may be different. Social structure was here before we got here and will be here after we're gone. But the structure of society remains the same and it remains constant. Okay, so let's describe some terms here. We have macro and micro sociology, and both are really important in understanding social trends. It just depends on which question you're interested in. So macro refers to broad scale forces, and we're interested in things on a national or global level. For example, studying large scale and complex social interactions. On the other hand, a micro level is focused on smaller interactions or interpersonal or small group interactions between people or small groups of people. So take, for example, the homeless population. Sociologists could study the homeless on both a macro scale and a micro scale. So from a macro perspective, a sociologist may be interested in national economic inequality, the affordable housing crisis, joblessness, and even the demographics of the homeless. So which groups are more likely to be homeless based on gender, age, race, or region of the country. On the other hand, sociologists could also study a homeless population at a micro level. So maybe they might decide to do an ethnography of a homeless camp, and they are interested in researching how does the homeless get by on a day-to-day basis? How do they form relationships with other homeless people? Do they have a social structure or maybe even a hierarchy within their homeless community? A social institution, as I mentioned before, is an established, organized system of social behavior with a recognized purpose. So most of the time when you think of the term institution, you think of a physical building, like walking into an educational institution. But an institution doesn't necessarily have to be physical. An institution can be like a family, right? So you can't step inside a family, but a family is universal across all different cultures and different societies and has a recognized purpose of reproducing members of society, teaching society, values, cultures, and language, and also making sure that society's most vulnerable, such as children and the elderly, have their basic needs met. And you, again, can study social institutions from both a macro perspective or a micro perspective. So from a macro perspective, we would be interested in perhaps what does the social institution do for society? Why does it keep getting reproduced? Why do we have this institution around? And also, what kind of conflicts within the institution arises? Since social institutions are made up of people, and people tend to reproduce inequality, there's usually inequality and privilege within different social institutions. At the micro level, we would be interested in how does a social institution inform your self-concept or your identity? And also, what sort of interpersonal relationships form within institutions, for example, in a workplace? Okay, so on a micro level scale, we're interested in statuses. And statuses are a established position in the social structure with a degree of prestige attached to it. And we have a plethora of statuses that we occupy. And we break it down between achieved statuses and acquired or ascribed statuses, as they're sometimes called. So an achieved status results from individual effort or lack of effort. So for example, you're not born a doctor, you're not born a student, it is something that you achieve. Also, it can result from a lack of effort, for example, becoming an ex-spouse or an ex-friend. However, an acquired or ascribed status is usually unchanging. And so this is something that you're born with that you cannot change or change easily. For example, your race or your gender. There are some statuses that are in the gray area, for example, social class. You're born within a social class and that heavily influences your opportunities and your self-concept, but also through individual effort, you can potentially move social classes. Same with age. You don't stay the same age for the remainder of your life, so that one also kind of bounces between achieved and ascribed or acquired. Your master status is your most significant identifying status, and it could be one that you want to have or one that you don't want to have. So for example, some people who strongly identify with their gender or race might see that as their master status, or someone who is in a wheelchair, society might give them the label of disabled as their master status. Okay, some more terms around statuses. So status anxiety is the fear of being perceived as failing by others. So have you ever felt like your clothes aren't trendy and as fashionable as you want them to be, or that you don't take as many lavish vacations as your peers, or perhaps you don't drive a nice enough car? You may be experiencing status anxiety. Have you ever heard of the phrase keeping up with the Joneses? It's kind of that idea that you always need to reaffirm a high level social status, especially in a materialistic society, a consumeristic society like ours. A status inconsistency is when an individual has a combination of both high and low statuses. And for this, I kind of think of a successful drug dealer. So a successful drug dealer might have a lot of money because of their high status of being successful with selling drugs, right? And that money can buy them expensive cars and houses and vacations. However, the low status of being a drug dealer may also hinder people's perception of them in society. Roles are associated expectations with statuses. So you can kind of think of it like this. You occupy a status, but you play a role. So roles are behavioral expectations attached to statuses occupied by individuals in a given society. Have you ever heard of the term gender roles? Those are expectations associated with being male or female. For example, a stereotypical gender role for a man is that in the home, he's the one who opens pickle jars and kills bugs, while the woman is the one who might do the laundry or nurture the children. A role strain occurs when you have competing roles within a single status. So take, for example, if you're a student and you're taking 4 different classes. So maybe in your English class, you have a paper to write, but on the same day, you also have a huge test in your calculus class. You may experience that strain between trying to accomplish all of those expectations within a single status. The difference between role strain and role conflict, however, is that there's competing role tensions within 2 or more statuses. So for example, being a mother and an employee. So you may have to go to PTA meetings and make lunch for your kids, but you also have the demands of being on work on time and completing your work by the deadlines, and that is a role conflict. A role exit occurs when you leave a certain status. For example, becoming an ex. This can be often a very traumatic experience for people. Oftentimes their lives become upended. They have to find new social networks or new ways of coping. For example, take an alcoholic who decides to get sober. They may find that they no longer have the same friends, their previous drinking buddies, and they might have to find new ways to cope with life stressors. So when you exit a role or leave a marriage or enter the adult workforce, and you have to learn a new set of norms, a new set of roles and expectations. In conclusion, social structure is stable arrangement of institutions, statuses, and roles that make up society. And it's sui generis, which means that it's inescapable and that it exists beyond the individuals of society. So you may decide to not vote and not participate in a social institution in that way, but you still have to abide by society's laws. And so in that way, it's really not possible to totally remove yourself from social structure. So thank you for watching, and please tune in next week when we talk about social interaction. Thanks.